Will Liu, host of the Raptors show, joins us this morning. Will, I got two things to try out with you. Welcome
Okay.
to the Darko side, or the Darko horse candidate was the winner? Oh, that's a bad
Wow.
reaction.
Mm.
The second one is slightly better.
Okay.
I have to
You can
say the
have it
Darko horse. He will
for your
cut.
next show.
Oh, I can't wait to not use that. But how you guys doing?
We're good. How's it going, Will? I know you had a little emergency pod because you finally got some real news. How's it feel?
Oh
That new
yeah.
head coach.
No, it's good. I think like a lot of people, you kind of grew a little antsy. Like when your job is to like do a daily Raptors show, and the only thing you have to talk about is like, hey, there's a new candidate here today, or there's a new candidate here for 7 weeks. I think people do get antsy a little bit, but I do understand like where the Raptors are coming from in terms of look, this they clearly had a list of candidates that I don't think a lot of other teams were shopping from, and when you think about a lot of the coaches that were hired in this period, that's a lot of guys who were fired. Guys like Nick Nurse, guys like Monty Williams, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from the Raptors perspective, they really wanted to take their time, interview, like 2 dozen candidates. And yeah, their conclusion after all of this is to hire Darko Rajakovic, who, as far as guys who haven't had a shot yet, which seems to be the big pattern, the Raptors did interview a lot of former head coaches, for example, very few of those. Um, but yeah, I mean, for a guy who hasn't had a shot yet, his resume is quite impressive. I think right now the state for most reporters are in is just like, okay, who is he? Let's talk to some people in his past. Let's try to get an idea of sort of who he is and sort of how he is to work with. Obviously, there's going to be an introductory press conference this week, so that will be a good chance to get to know him as well. But at least this process is over, and we'll see sort of how the Raptors move forward with this new coach.
So we bring you on to do the dirty work, the Sparks
Mm.
Notes version of all the research that we no, we did a little bit, but you're the Raptors guy. So what have you learned
Yeah.
from your from your investigation on the newest head coach of the Raptors, and maybe like what this signals for their direction moving forward?
Okay, so a couple of things. And number one, I think there always is a bit of a concern with like European coaches coming over. It's like, okay, how are they going to handle the situation culturally? Like, number one, do they speak English? Obviously, he speaks English. Have they become acclimated with the NBA, North American sports? Yes, he has. He's been working in the NBA for the last decade plus. Does he have a little bit of head coaching experience? He does, both back home in Serbia and also here in the D League. It's kind of a little bit similar, I suppose, to Nick Nurse's resume when you really think about it. Also, one of the fun facts that you learn about him, he started coaching when he was 16. He's 44
That's
right now.
crazy, eh?
It's kind of like, wow, that's a lot of coaching experience for somebody who's still that young. Like 44 is not old at all. So definitely has been a lifer in terms of the passion for coaching. Obviously, has coached on both sides, and yeah, I mean, I think his reputation recently in his last 2 stops, where he was brought to Phoenix from OKC and then brought from Phoenix to Memphis. In Phoenix, he was the offensive coordinator, and the Heat that season, or the Suns that season, were number one in the league in assists, and also second last in terms of isolation. So they played a lot of team basketball. They definitely moved the ball around a lot. Also, fun fact, they got Aaron Baines, who I think a lot of Raptor fans will remember Aaron Baines for not great reasons, just because he just didn't really work out. But he got Aaron Baines to average like 13 points a game, which is kind of amazing when you really think about what Aaron Baines did with the Tampa Bay Raptors. But he was the offensive coordinator in Phoenix, and then the last 3 years he's been in Memphis, which has been a pretty successful program outside of the off-court issues, which we'll just put aside. I don't think he has anything to do with that, but yeah, he's been really instrumental in the developmental process there in terms of getting guys like Desmond Bain or Jaren Jackson Jr. to level up their games. Of course, it's a lot easier to do that as an assistant coach. You can have a lot more dedicated one-on-one time with guys. And the move over from assistant to head coach, it's going to be a lot different. Like when you're an assistant, you can dive into all the details and you can be more hands-on. When you're the head coach, you're more like the CEO of the situation. You have to pick and choose. But that's his reputation. He's been involved in player development. He's been involved in offensive um, you know, sets and creation and running offense and things like that. And I think those are the two aspects when you think about the Raptors last season that were quite missing. Like Masai talked about literally verbatim, I did not enjoy watching this team. And I think a lot of that comes down to sort of their offensive process. And then I think the other thing too he talked about was, the Raptors developmental program, which is sort of the backbone of this whole thing and what made them successful the last decade. That's really dried up. So at least on paper, this new head coach with Darko, he addresses both of those issues. Now, of course, I'm really interested to see how that is actually put into practice. But for now, the hiring makes a lot of sense. We'll know a lot more once we actually get to talk to the guy.
How much of a stretch is it to say that they've targeted someone who's at the opposite end of the spectrum compared to Nick Nurse?
I mean, I don't think it's too much of a stretch. Like, I don't think they wanted the. I think there were good parts for Nick that I think that they wanted to find it in the next head coach too, right? I think Nick was very innovative with his defensive schemes, and hopefully Darko is as well. Like I would still like to see the Raptors whip out a box and one occasionally. Um, but I do think at the same time though that yeah, those aspects in terms of emphasizing player development, and also being a little bit more purposeful in terms of the offensive principles, whether that's like running more sets each time down the floor or even having more like of a team-based system offensively. I think that definitely would be an upgrade over Nick. And it's funny too because when Nick got brought into Toronto originally, and one of his responsibilities back when he was an assistant was to sort of lead the offense. And back when Dwayne Casey won the Coach of the Year award in 17-18, the year he got let go, a lot of the improvements on that team was on the offensive end, especially when the bench mob came around. And at that time in 17-18, you would say Nick Nurse was an offensive guru who has shown a history of player development. So that is the interesting thing with assistants, right? Like you don't necessarily know what the responsibilities are and sort of how much the progress of the players and things like that to specifically put on the coach. But at the same time, yeah, like I do think there were areas that in terms of what happened with Nick last year, it wasn't necessarily just player development and also how they ran the offense. I think they also just needed a new voice. Also, he kind of, soft quit on the team at the end of the season there
Mm.
publicly, which is kind of insane. But yeah, so you needed to address some of those issues, and ideally, Darko, when you look at his resume, he does have some of those aspects in terms of improving offense and improving player development that the Raptors clearly need.
Does the Darko hire signal anything to you about what Masai may have planned for this offseason?
I mean, yes and no. I think the reason I'm saying no is because I think that Masai and Bobby, they're gonna move how they're gonna move regardless of what the decision was with the head coach. I do think that when you think back on this process, like the Raptors really did not consider a lot of these coaches who were pretty accomplished, but the Raptors wanted to get a fresh voice in there no matter what. Like a lot of the candidates were like JJ Redick, for example, and it's like, okay, well, or a whole bunch of assistants, around the league, and they didn't want to pursue a guy like Monty that seriously, or a guy like Doc Rivers that seriously. Um, who else has been available? Um, oh yeah, Mike Budenholzer as well. Like these are a lot of like former Coach of the Year winners that you would be pretty justified in bringing in. The Raptors really wanted to go with a fresh voice, and so from that perspective, I can see why people would read into that in terms of just like, okay, that means the Raptors will rebuild. But I think the front office is going to move regardless of who the head coaching decision was going to be, and I think that whether they want to move in a win now kind of direction or they want to move in a rebuild situation, they're going to need the same aspects from the head coach. They're going to need somebody who can really put in some new principles on offense to make this team look a lot better because the Raptors have been bottom five in half court creation for the last 2 years, which is pretty evident when you watch the actual product. And then also you need to get development in Toronto because as Masai has basically admitted, like free agency is just not a factor for Toronto. Yeah, I mean, if you follow the Raptors for their near 30 years of history, obviously that's been the case. Free agents don't really come here. So the way you actually improve the roster is by drafting players, bringing players in, and then making them better. And so player development is going to be important regardless of what direction you move in.
Yeah, if nothing else, and in the vein of player development, does it say like, "Hey, we're okay with just taking a step back here for a season. Like, we're not necessarily going to just say, what we have, we're going to push, and we're going to do it the best we possibly can with what we have." Maybe this is okay. We're taking a step back. We're going to breathe here. We're going to make some decisions. It's not like a complete makeover, but with this new coach, with someone who needs some experience themselves, we're just maybe alleviating a little bit of the pressure we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I hope so. Because I think that to me that would be what the sensible direction would be. I mean, I thought that's the direction they might have moved at the trade deadline as well, in terms of pivoting away from contention this past year and also just like pushing up in the draft. Um, but they kind of you know zagged. Like that's the Masai Bobby approach. They zag a lot. What the conventional wisdom says about the team isn't usually what they do with the team. Now, of course, you look like a genius when you zag, and eventually you're actually first to a trend. So you're ahead of the curve. But it works the opposite way when you zag, when it seems pretty clear that the roster has a limited ceiling. And look, I don't even mind continuing to build on a lot of what the Raptors have in place. Like, I'm not trying to say they don't have talent, but at the same time, um, if you want to improve from what we saw this past season, a new head coach is a good step for sure and a necessary step. But are you going to find ways to bring more talent to the team? And I think that's where it's a little bit concerning, right? Like, you have a lot of free agents coming up. You already hear reports about other teams interested in Fred.
Hmm.
You have a very key, player option pickup deadline coming up. I don't think he's going to pick it up. By the way, I think he's going to earn a lot more than 20 million next year. But yeah, are you going to be able to retain him? And if you don't retain him, that's okay. But how do you upgrade from Fred at point guard? Because this is already a team that was very, very lacking in guard skills. And if you look at the way Darko has run his teams in the past, whether that's in Phoenix where he had Devin Booker, or in Memphis where he had John Moran and Desmond Bain, Raptors don't even have anything close to that level of guard talent with or without Fred. So how do you improve the talent on the roster? Because you can't expect Darko to cook with nothing really on the roster.
Talking to Will Liu, host of the Raptors show. You had your emergency pod after the naming of the new head coach. Everybody can check that out. Getting the sense that that third pick might be available. Raptors have been a little bit rumored to be involved in it. Do you see a pathway in which they could capitalize on that? And would that be maybe the right move if you have a new head coach who's looking for some youth?
Yeah. I mean, look. I think right now, we are just sort of connecting the dots, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't think there's anything specifically linking Portland to Toronto in terms of, hey, they want these guys, and I don't think it's necessarily anything linking from Toronto's perspective of like the Raptors are going to pursue these picks. I think it just makes sense on paper,
Yeah.
and especially in the like, what, we're less than 2 weeks to the draft now, on June 22nd. Like, we're gonna hear a lot more of these reports, but until like this, a trade like this wouldn't really happen until after Charlotte makes their decision in terms of who they're drafting on number two. Obviously, we know San Antonio is going to take Victor Wembanyama, the alien, at
Yeah.
the number one pick. Clearly, number two is much more of a debate in terms of, is Charlotte really going to pick up Brandon Miller instead of Scoot Henderson? And then after that, there's going to be a 5-minute period where you will hear a lot of furious discussion. And hopefully, obviously, a lot of this is discussed in advance in terms of like, if Charlotte does A, then you do B, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's when a move like that would actually try to come out, or potentially work out. But in the meantime, yeah, I mean, to me, if you are going to trade with Portland, and Portland does seem fairly committed to building around Damian Lillard, the Raptors do have two players that would really, really appeal to them in terms of Pascal and OG Anunoby. Can OG get you the third pick? If he can, I'm doing that deal immediately. If
Mm.
can Pascal get you the third pick? I think he should. And I would ask for more than just the third pick. But yeah, I mean, it's that there is opportunities available to them, and I do think that for the Raptors, one thing they try to do is try to stay flexible, in the sense that like you not to say that you don't build a direction based on what the front office wants, but it's also about what your options are, right? Like, you can't just say I'm going to rebuild, but all the options to you are terrible. I don't think getting the third pick would be a terrible option at all. I think that'd be a great option to start a rebuild. So we'll see if that option is available to them. I think there is probably similar opportunities available in terms of from Houston, who have the fourth pick. They want to be competitive this year. Do you make a trade there? Detroit at number 5. I mean, I'm not even sure what Detroit is all about, to be honest, other than paying Monty Williams more than every player on the roster except for one guy.
Mm.
But maybe they also want to compete as well. So there are other opportunities to trade up in the draft. But number 3 is definitely the one that's most interesting. And if that's available, you absolutely have to explore it. And if it was available and we hear about it after the fact and the Raptors chose not to explore it, I would love a explanation as to why they didn't, because that would be a great chance.
Last one for you here quickly, Will.
Mhm.
Darko will be unveiled shortly. Not sure we know the date yet, but when he does get introduced to the media, what do you want to hear?
Honestly, I want to hear what the front office told them in terms of how they want to take the future of this team and how he fits into that. Not to say that I don't want to hear about who he is and his background and his story, because that's also very interesting and we don't know much about that. But very, very much want to know what the front office's plans are, because I think that, the head coaching position was the easier part in terms of how to decide the future. The more difficult thing is, how do you address the roster as is. So, um, welcome, Darko. You're in this, and now we want to know, what you're in this with in terms of the players.